So we're gonna continue with David Ricardo, the high price of bullion and international trade, absolute advantage, competitive advantage, and then as far as microeconomics, comparative advantage um, at the firm level and at the individual level. Um, so as far as the textbook, it's a textbook. I did read it at Emory. Um, So I'm interested in how much it costs, considering there's internet models like the Kindle and things like that. I tend to like to have a textbook to highlight. It's quite engaging. Um, let's see what it says. Higher education is subject to Baumol's cost disease. Unlike manufacturing, teaching cannot be easily automated to increase productivity. Therefore, costs rise faster than general inflation just to maintain the same level. Like, how much does it cost? So between a hundred and 300, that's about average. This one's probably $35 on Amazon. So, um, if you think about it, it sounds like you could make a lot of money if you understood it, because that's what economics is about. Um, David Ricardo was a economist in 1810, um, kind of at the onset of nationalism. If you think about the Enlightenment, it's the 15th century. 1492, Christopher Columbus sails to Columbus, or sorry, to Roanoke and to in the Mayflower to to the Pilgrim Place in Boston, um, and it's talking about banknotes and bullion, right? So the Bank of England, the London School of Economics. So, you know, I like ooh, you know, it's nice. So here it's $33. You can get it for $2.94. I'm not really making a statement. I'm just saying, um, I'm saying it's interesting because publishing in books are really difficult to price and understand. Um, if it's not the case that reading finance and books on ethics increase potential earnings, because the counter argument there would be this is completely theoretical, but there's been no math yet. You don't need a computer to read this. How would it teach you skills other than like hard work? One of the things in college you want, to understand like manual labor. This doesn't help with that at all. So let's read it. This is page 5, page 2. Jump to page 5, maybe come back. The bank substitutes a currency of no value for one most costly and enables us to turn the precious metals, which, though a very necessary part of our capital, yields no revenue, into a capital which will yield one. If you were to think about it from a feline perspective, Alexandria, um, Mark Antony and Cleopatra, a great book by George Bernard Shaw, also pretty expensive, um, written in Egypt about the pyramids and cats and things of that nature. A great book, much like Romeo and Juliet, but more in the nature of Kafka in terms of its writing. Um, my sense there is um, that women wear makeup and they also wear jewelry. Um, so men don't really. Um, so yeah, just from a observational capacity, it would be the same principle, which is that men would wear jewelry like gold if they were rich, or if it was tied to money, maybe they would put you know money, you know, like they would staple money on their clothes. The highways, like the coin, are highly useful, but neither yield any revenue. Some people alarmed at the specie leaving the country might consider that as a disadvantage trade, which required us, if you think about hyperinflation in places like Zimbabwe, there are cases where they run out of their own currency and it doesn't have any value. It's hard to imagine, but due to, I guess, they spilled water or something, I guess, or oil, um, or a foreign enemy or a civil war, the money loses value. So you can have a basic income for food, and then the money at the grocery store or at a restaurant loses the value. Or like when you trade at a different country, like I guess 50 miles away, then it doesn't buy anything. So they have dollars. You still got to tie it to dollars. So if there's a gold standard in the world, it's dollars. One of the things the Chinese threaten is to cash in on their debt. You know, if they demand to be repaid, there'd be a run on the dollar, and dollars wouldn't be I guess, the reserve currency in the world. Um, Indeed, the law so considers it by its enactments against the exportation of specie. Um, but a very little reflection will convince us that it is our choice and not our necessity that sends it abroad, and that it is highly beneficial to us to exchange that commodity which is superfluous for others which may be made productive. So if you think about World War II, without the war, right, without the costs, what you would notice is there was the Smoot-Hawley tariff. Um, I don't know, the stock market crashed in 1945, let's say, much like the pandemic. And if you were to say it was because of the war, you'd be doing yourself a disservice, because we have no idea what the economics of the times were domestically, what the sociology was, what the technology was domestically. You know, we recovered fully from the pandemic. Fully. One thing that happened was Zoom went up, right? So people made a killing during the pandemic. So you know, economic, economic power is more important than war by far. Um, Now, is financial power more important than political power? There, right now, I'm in a little bit of a disagreement with myself and Milton Friedman. If it be advantageous to export it, no laws can effectually prevent its exportation. If you were to study the corn laws, like in Scotland and England under Oliver Cromwell from, you know, the 12th century to the 15th century, and then from the 18th century to currently, what you'll find is it's really civil law. That's what the corn laws were. It meant like you have a right to a dowry. So when people get married, you have to give a certain percentage to the government to protect the public ceremony. You know, so you could read it. It's interesting. That's not what this is about. Happily, in this case as well as in most others in commerce, where there is free competition, the interests of the individual and that of the community are never at variance. So, one thing we're working with in algebra is variables. So variable, you know, sometimes you have to joke to get through something. So a variable, I was talking to Bruce, um, I was talking to Bruce, we were watching Kung Fu, and we were saying a variable is variable. That's what a standard deviation is. So then is there a constant variable? He mentioned pi. And that's interesting because pi goes on forever, so it is variable, it's not constant. I asked for a constant variable. So what I said is y equals 1x. That would just be one dot though. So then we thought about it again. So we said slope, y equals 2x, right? So that's a constant variable, the slope, 2 over 1, right? There's a hole there because that's a number that's not really a variable, but slope is a variable. So let's look up variable. So variable is an adjective, and that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for variable, the noun. Anything that is not fixed or constant. So a constant variable is an oxymoron. Any factor, quantity, or situation that is liable to change or take on different values. Look at examples. Look at a dictionary. So variable costs. It's great there's models, but this is a syntactic structure definition. Costs that fluctuate directly with changes in output. Does anyone does so like okay, so it's a noun, yeah, a variable cost. So a good example would be a sales tax. So if it's 6%, it's a variable cost because if you spend $100, it's $6. If you spend $200, it's $12. So one variable is taxation. I'm glad we got there. We're, you know, and now there will be a persecutory force, right? So were it possible to carry the law against, so carry the remainder, you know, so 6%, right, is $6 and then $12. So what you do is you say, okay, so the average of 6 and 12 is 18 divided is 9, right? So the actual uh the standard deviation first, right? So the standard deviation, and we can get into it, but that's what a standard deviation is. It's the difference in averages. So if you had 10 and 5, right, and 10 and 6 in two different sets, the standard deviation is 1. Or a better way to look at it, or a different way, would be if you have 10 and 5 and 10 and 6, right? The standard deviation is 5 in the 10 and 5 example. It's 5 to the average, but it's 4 on the right side, right? Because you could have 9 and 1. So in that case, the standard deviation is 1. And that's a neutral definition of a standard deviation. 2 ounces or more of coin gold for uncoined gold. This would be a real depreciation of our currency, raising the prices of all other commodities in the same proportion as it increased that of gold bullion. The owner of money would in this case suffer. So this is 45 pages, by the way. I thought it was 300, which is, it couldn't be. Case suffer an injury equal to, so an injury is a loss equal to what a proprietor a, a proprietor of corn would suffer. A prop of bread, for instance, is a proprietor. Were a law to be passed prohibiting him from selling his corn for more than half its market value. So let's look at market value, right? So it's interesting because average and standard deviation are household items. Um, but so market value. So one way that's of interest is the labor market. What is the market value of my 1 year of salary, right? In a minimalist form, if you have to consider health care, retirement, commuter benefits, vacation time, that's a lot of variables, right? Um, a variable is, something that changes with output. So salary definitely changes with output. What if I were, it's 40 hours, right? So let's say it's 65 hours. So I'm happy with $65,000. That is my market value. Today I make about $20,000 a year. Um, Growing up, I thought it'd be $1 million a year. Another way to think about market value is you have uh, three offers. One is 60, and it's neutral. So one is 65,000, one is 75,000, and one is 55,000. What's your market value? It's 75,000. Um, so a lot of times when we think about market value in negotiation, when asked, how much do you want to make, one thing you could say is what's the market value for this job, right? So there's a first mover advantage, a first mover disadvantage. So you'll also have cases where you say, I'm willing to get $65,000, and on your offer letter, it'll be $1.2 million. No, I'm kidding, but it'll be $75,000. That's happened to me before. It can be less than that. So those are verbal contracts um, through the human resource process or practice. Um, and, if you were to look at a house, the market value of that house is the amount someone is willing to pay for it, right? So if you have a $5 bill and someone's willing to give you $6 for it, that's the market value. With a painting, you know, and that's not what we're talking about. The law against the exportation of coin has this tendency, but is so easily evaded that gold in bullion has always been nearly of the same value as the gold in coin. A tip there is, it's market value, uncoined gold, variance, which is different than variable, exportation, the, if. So when you read, if you want a tip, it's the first and the last sentence or word. Thus, then it appears that the currency of one country can never, for any length of time, be much more valuable as far as equal quantities of the precious metals are concerned than that of another. And that's not true. If you have, a car here in America where Ford was invented, um, unlikely that Toyota or Honda were invented here. Um, but then, yeah, um, a Ferrari here is worth a lot more than, a plane in Egypt. That comes from anthropic principle, but it comes from valuation. Um, and mostly it comes from productivity. That excess of currency is but a relative term. That if the circulation of England were 10 millions, that of France 5 millions, that of Holland 4 millions, whilst they kept their proportions to the currency of each country were doubled or trebled. All right. Um, you can put your questions, you know, in the suggestion box at the Hilton.